and this is the Unusual Minds podcast. Thank you for tuning in. On this week on the show, I am honored to have John Scott, actor, reenactor, history buff, and all-around Old West nerd, but better known as Santee from the Arizona Ghostrides. Thanks for coming on the show, Santee.
Cheers, everyone.
So I am glad to have him on because, a couple months back, I'll rewind for you folks. A couple months back, I wanted to know more about the Old West. So I did a deep dive on YouTube and I looked at probably 30, 40 different channels because I wanted to do a show specifically on that period. And honestly, the Arizona Ghostrides by far is the most engaging content out there on the matter. I mean, it's the only show that has both a mischievous ghost and a CGI dinosaur.
CGI?
So let me ask you there, Santee, how did this all get started? How did you get into, well, I guess I'll rewind. What made you want to start the Arizona Ghostrides?
Well, to be honest, I didn't actually start the Arizona Ghostrides. A fellow reenactor named Jim Wells actually started the Arizona Ghostrides way back in the day, and we were all part of a different group.
Okay.
Our group kind of fell apart, as groups do, and we started as a collective, 4 or 5 of us. We started the Arizona Ghostrides together, and he'd already had the name because of a previous group. And he sold it to me back in 2017, he sold it back. He sold it to me. So I've had it ever since then.
Awesome. So I guess then how long have you been in the reenactment community?
Ever since I moved out to Arizona in 2001.
Okay. So was, I don't know. So was that your first, inkling to get into reenacting? Did you like go to reenactment and just get inspired to get in the community, or like what was the driving force behind that?
Well, okay, let's go all the way back to the 60s. I grew up watching Westerns, as most people in my generation, prior generations did. And I just fell in love with them. And I thought, boy, if I could ever do that, that'd be awesome. Fast forward to about 1994, and I'm now of age to buy a gun by myself. And the first gun I want is a Colt single action Army. Of course, I didn't realize those were about $1,200. So I settled for a replica, and I started doing cowboy action shooting, which was available where I lived in New York City at the time. Not in New York City. They frown upon that, shooting in Central Parks and all that stuff. So we would shoot, and I started getting the cowboy action shooting. I thought, wow, this is cool. Not quite what I wanted, and I moved out to Arizona 2001, and I thought, there's got to be something more than cowboy action shooting for me.
Yeah.
And so I joined a reenactment group because I thought that might be fun. And that was the missing thing. The theatrical or the entertainment part of it was what was missing, being able to shoot your friends. As weird as that sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I've only done one reenactment, and my buddy Zach, he was a history major. We met in college, and he is a really, really big history buff. I mean, he is primarily focused on right before the Civil War up until the Industrial Revolution. Like that is his thing. So I went to a Civil War reenactment there with him, and it was mostly just playing around a bonfire, picking at my banjo, but just that sense of camaraderie that you get when you're actually camping out, in the era, everything around you. I mean, it's just a surreal experience, and it kind of makes you so appreciative of, not only everything we have now, but everything that our forefathers went through in those rougher days past.
Yeah, the Civil War reenactors are pretty hardcore. I've talked to a few of them, and I tell you, they really do a lot of research.
Oh yeah.
I'm so impressed with them. I've been to a couple of, what would you call them? Living history events, I guess, where out here they encompass a lot of different eras. And the Civil War, the Mountain Men, boy, those guys are really hardcore. And it's impressive because it helps bring my level of my level of professionalism up a lot more. you know.
Yeah, and I mean, it was definitely an intense experience, but I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy reenacting. The kind of stuff that you guys do with the live shows is that I don't know, you're able to get a lot of humor out of it, and the more you can make someone laugh, the more you can get them engaged with the material, the more of it they're going to retain because it has that emotional connection, right? And that's the one thing, looking at your guys' YouTube channel, all the different topics that you discuss. I mean, a lot of it is topics that people aren't normally going to think of, but that are interesting, right? Like hygiene in the old west, specific types of clothing. Actually, I had to use one of your tips to get this guy out of storage, and I actually sat and steamed it and reformed it earlier today.
That hat looks. I was going to mention it, but that hat looks surprisingly like the one I use for uh, my drunk outfit. It just doesn't
Yeah.
have the dent on the top, so it looks very similar.
You
Yeah.
know, I had a band that would go around it that I had like a nice turquoise buckle on with a bunch of feathers and stuff. But after a weekend at a festival out in the rain, that just went away real
Oh
quick.
man, sorry.
So I got to build another one up. But I mean, I guess that's the one thing about reenacting as well, that like the type of character that you choose. I mean, you can really bring out parts of yourself that you normally wouldn't have a other way of expressing. You know what I mean? So that's the one thing I love about reenactments as well, is that when the crowd itself, the people actually come get into character, enjoy themselves. I mean, it really is fun to see what kind of characters they create, and what kind of things they bring to the table themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a little bit of a difference, in my opinion, between Old West reenactment and living history. So
Mhm.
when you go to a Civil War event, they're reenactors, and I guess they're also doing living history because they're probably bivouacking, or is that the term? Bivouacking? Oh, that sounds weird. Is that right? Anyway, they're camping out and they get the fire. They're sleeping out under the stars. They're drinking coffee out of a tin cup, the whole thing, um, and um, and not bathing probably. But when we do reenactments in the Old West, they're not always reenactments. I like to stay away from that word and go to gunfight show, which is what
Okay.
we do, because the shows that we're doing may or may not have ever happened. Um, we base them in fact. Usually, it's centered around outlaws that think they're smarter than they actually are, which is not unusual in the Old West. But they're not necessarily things that actually happened. Out here in Arizona, uh, you can throw a dart and hit an OK Corral reenactment anytime you throw it. They're all over the place. But we tend to not do those, just for the mere fact that there are other people doing them. And like you said, humor is a big part of it. So we try to really engage the audience and get them involved with it. It's silly, but it's still history if you can put those two together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I think when you put silliness and history together, that's when you start to actually have an entertaining historical experience. Now, let me ask you. We were talking about how at reenactments people develop their own characters. So was Santee your original character that you did for these shows, or have you had a few different ones over the years?
Oh, I play a different character in probably every show. If you think about it as sort of a repertory group, where everybody plays different parts.
Okay.
That's kind of what it is. Santee is really just the alias of who I am. Um, you could probably guess from watching my videos that I'm um, usually the goofy townsperson, or
Mhm.
sometimes I play the gunfighter. But for the most part, I'm usually the bumbling fool, which is my middle name in high school, bumbling fool. So yeah.
Is that what they gave you on the yearbook too? Most likely to be bumbling fool.
No, no, they said you already were one. Is
Yeah, I mean, looking at the videos, you're always more the comic relief, and then usually, I want to say it was what Dirty Dan plays the straight man, and that relationship is so important in comedy. I mean, you go back to even like Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello. Like you always have to have your comic relief paired with a good straight man, and you guys
right.
have found that balance, which I can appreciate.
Thank you, thank you, appreciate that. We have fun doing them, as I'm sure you understand. It's sometimes it's hard to keep a straight face, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, particularly when you're, infusing like different movie clips. We had already talked about the dinosaur and the mischievous ghost. So I guess what made you want to kind of have these different recurring characters and not just play it more for, like a straight historical documentary?
Well, if you watch the first, when I first started the channel, it was really I just wanted to show everybody about show everybody what reenactment living history was, and I didn't really have. I had this vlog idea that I was just going to sit in front of the camera, kind of
Mhm.
like I'm doing now, and just talk to people. And I got bored with that real quick and thought, I need to really perform. I need to be out there doing stuff and doing skits and things. So when I did the Bill Brazelton episode the first time, I thought, well, they talk about his ghost being prevalent in the area, and I thought, wouldn't it be kind of neat if his ghost followed me home, kind of like Haunted Mansion? And
Yeah, yeah.
so I just thought he'd be my comic relief when Dan's not available, or Arizona Red, or Batjack, or any of those other people you see, Jerry Woods, any of those people you see, they're all working, so I can't always work with them. So I can always work with Bill Brazelton. So there you go.
Yeah, and I mean Bill Brazelton as well. The historical figure.
Yeah,
He's such an interesting character. Just
oh yeah.
because of, I mean, he was. I don't want to say the most renowned gunslinger in the West, but he's definitely the most notorious.
Well, it was really, yeah. What's funny is there's just not a lot known about him. There's more info on people like Jesse James and Billy the Kid than there is on Bill Brazelton. In fact, we're not even sure that's his real name.
Hmm.
So it's a, but he apparently was very good with a gun, and he was smart. So
Now, have you ever gone through and compared the kill counts of different historical gunslingers? Because, like, I don't know, a lot of them are actually tall tales. I mean, you look at how the folk stories around like Jesse James, Billy the Kid. I mean, how they were really used at the time as like I don't want to say marketing or branding, but they were building an image for themselves, and I don't know, that's what helped them escape justice a few different times was having the people on their side. But with Brazelton, you don't really hear too many like tall tales. There's no store or there's no old folk songs written about him, so he really is a mysterious character. And I mean, it's interesting that back in the day you really didn't have documentation like you have nowadays, so people could change their names, and you really wouldn't know the true story on someone.
yeah, absolutely, you're absolutely right. I mean, they didn't have ID cards back then that they flashed whenever they went into a county. Oh wait, do we do that now? I haven't done jury duty in so long I can't remember. Do you have to show your ID? Anyway,
I
yeah,
haven't done jury
whatever the case.
in years.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, people back then could choose an alias. Many of these, if you look at some of these gunslingers, and that is an okay term to use, outlaws, gunslingers, people like that, they did just seamlessly change their names. Some of them have three and four aliases.
Yeah.
Butch Cassidy is actually not Butch Cassidy. I can't remember his real name, but um, there's just a lot of them out there. Harry Longbaugh was Sundance Kid. That was where'd they come up with these? Well, Jesse James, I believe, was actually Jesse Woodson James, but this is a guy coming out of the Civil War.
Hmm.
Everybody knew him in the area, so
Yeah, I often, well, I mean, what was the gunslinger that he actually killed the lawman that was chasing him and then assumed his identity and then went back and continued a career in law enforcement? Or it could have been a bounty hunter.
oh
I'm not
wow.
sure the specifics. I was watching one of those like gunslinger documentaries, and they were talking about a guy who had done that because really all you needed was those tin badges back then, and a lot of times there wasn't like a uniformity on how they were made and like a rank associated with them.
Well, that's true, and a lot of the times, marshals, and sheriffs were basically hired for their ability to shoot and to be not afraid to pull the trigger because people needed law and order, and there wasn't a whole lot of it out there at the time. So it's not unheard of that you would have a guy that was an outlaw be your marshal of your town. You
Yeah.
know, because hey, at least he can use a gun and he ain't afraid to use it. But yeah, I don't know the story of that guy. I'll have to look that up. That's really interesting. Huh.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do some research and find that name and get it to you because it was just a little footnote in this documentary. It was a name I hadn't really heard of before. At least he's not one of the famous gunslingers. But I mean, I don't know. I think that plays a lot into the mystique of the Old West as well,
Mhm.
because the Old West was like the last era before industrialization and the seeds of what would be the modern world. So really, that law uh conquering that chaos in that region, it was the last bit of, I mean, not only was it the last bit of continental wilderness in the United States being colonized, but it was also humanity in that last bit of like wildness before the modern world really set in and took away all the mystery in life. And I feel like that's why it's so romanticized and it's such a vital part of the American character.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Boy, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's exactly, yeah, you even said it a lot better than I would have ever said it. But absolutely, that's you're talking about a big frontier full of unknowns.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, you had people traveling for days before they saw a town, kind of thing, or they may see an outpost. You had trailblazers still making trails well into the 1870s. It's just an amazing era where a lot of people talk to me about Red Dead Redemption. I have to tell you, I don't know if you're a gamer or not.
I love that game.
Red Dead Redemption has actually become a resurgence for the Old West, and I am so happy about that. I can't even tell you, because we're in this weird period of people in my generation were the last ones where we could really sit there and watch westerns on Saturday mornings, and you would be absolutely assured there'd be two or three westerns coming out every year in the movie theater.
Oh yeah.
Nowadays, I'm like, when was the last western on was the last one Cowboys and Aliens? I mean, I don't even know. They're just getting further and further apart. So something like Red Dead Redemption has really brought forth a lot of kids to this genre, and
Yeah.
it's that's really amazing. So they're learning about it. And they're like, really? Was it? Did you really have to drive or drive? Did you really have to ride your horse like 2 hours to get to another town? Well, 2 hours, yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
Try 2 days.
that's the one thing I love about that game is just how far spread out everything is and how, it really is a journey. I mean, and like, I don't know, the game is set to where I want to say it's like every 3 hours is like the passage of a day, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because the timing's off, but like they tried to keep that game as realistic and as possible. And honestly, after I completed the story mode, which is within itself one of the best story arcs in video games. If you actually, get into the online gameplay where you're creating your own character, I mean, it is almost like, you're creating your own reenactment in that sense. And you can, choose to be a lawman, you can choose to be a bandit, you can just go around raiding, other parties. I mean, it really does allow you to have that virtual Old West experience.
Yeah. I love the fact that you have to wait for a train or wait for a stagecoach if you want to rob it. It's not like they come by every 30 seconds or something like that. And you have to sort of plan your day out or clean your guns or whatever the deal is.
Yeah.
You know, eh, there are a lot of tropes that in the game, but for the most part, they did pretty darn well with it. And I mean, I can't be happier with the game. And like you, I played through the whole thing. I really didn't enjoy the main story as much as everything else. I liked the freedom of being on my own and doing my own thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would always have my little pup tent out. I would never go
Yeah,
back to camp unless I absolutely had to, because I don't know, like the thing that, and I know it's a super nerdy thing to say, but the thing I loved the most about that game was the hunting. You could go out and you could actually hunt, skin animals, sell the furs, actually make custom clothing, like that sort of thing.
yeah,
Just kind of really tickled my fancy
yeah,
because, after you complete most of the missions, the game does get repetitive. It's the same type of missions over and over again. But when you can go out and hunt a legendary grizzly bear and then have, a special jacket made with this one guy that you have to travel across the map to get to, I mean, it
right.
gives you that sense of accomplishment.
I remember at one point I know it's hard for you to believe since I've been sipping at this, but I was drinking while I was playing the game, and I had to I wanted to get that white alligator, uh, and I was sitting there shooting this white alligator, thinking to myself, "What am I doing? I'm playing a Western game. I'm somewhere in potentially Louisiana." Shooting a white alligator. I don't know. It just was really funny to me, but you're right. Those legendary animals are pretty amazing.
Well, I
You know.
mean, the one thing I love about that game as well, the one thing I love about Westerns as well is that, the cowboy, it is a distinctly American archetype. And there's something that resonates with people who are, from American because it just embodies that American spirit, that individualistic person within us all that just seeks to pave their own trail. And I think that's one of the reasons why we had talked about, this generation. This is their first real, experience with the Western genre for a lot of kids. I remember when I was a kid, the Western was always what was on at my grandpa's house. Like he would sit and watch Rawhide or
Yeah.
Bonanza over and over and over again. And I like it has that emotional connection with me. And then as I got older, I really resonated with the spaghetti westerns and the Sergio Leone films. Those movies are timeless. So I have a roommate who's a little bit younger than me, and he had never seen any of these Western movies before. So I've just been forcing him against his will to sit and watch all of them. And we made it
Yeah.
through the Dollars trilogy, and now we're going to start getting into the John Ford stuff. And I know that transition of the idealistic Western, and then as time goes on, I think the genre of the Western has defined where American society and culture was. Because if you look at like the John Ford films, those early idealized, heavily romanticized Westerns, you really start to see, they had their prevalence in the 50s and the 60s, right after the war when people had so much faith in their government, so much faith in the system. But, by the time the late 60s and the 70s rolls on, when trust is kind of corroded in the government, you
Hmm.
start seeing the spaghetti westerns and the kind of the deconstructionalist or anti-westerns start to come up that really starts to break down the myth and look at the gritty reality of what things would be.
It's a really good point. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Wow, you really are good with this timeline thing. I think I was a little distressed when you mentioned that you were, basically forcing your roommate to watch it. That hurt me a little bit. But I thought, boy, they're so entertaining. How can you not like them? I mean, the archetype of Clint Eastwood is the guy that, geez, I wanted to be when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to be John Wayne too, but Clint Eastwood shot people in the back because he was smart and didn't take chances. So I got to give him that. It's geez, don't take a chance on that guy because he'll kill you. So just shoot him. But John Wayne would never do that.
Yeah.
Never shoot a guy in the back. Um, anyway, I digress on that. I've been watching westerns lately on Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu. I have to tell you, as well as they're produced and as amazing that they are, this reality thing that they're trying to push upon me of this depressing era of sadness and um, just overall misery, it's really depressing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've sat through probably 3 or 4 westerns lately that I thought, boy, I just kind of want to go drink and cut my wrists. This is not what I wanted. Um, and it's really disappointing. I kind of wish they would. Did you see it? There was a TV show or TV show. I think it's on Amazon Prime or Netflix called Brothers Sisters.
I love that movie.
Yeah,
Just the story. I mean, even though like towards the end when they start getting when they start dumping the chemicals in the river and like
yeah,
and creating substances that they definitely didn't have at the time as far as like
yeah,
sulfuric acids and the such, but just the character drama that went into that. John C. Riley and Joaquin Phoenix killed it. I
yeah.
I thought it was a very sad movie, but it was I don't
But
know, it
it
was very
wasn't.
well
But it
done.
wasn't that sad, and I think that was the thing. Is I was like, oh, this is. I at that point when they were all in the pond or the creek,
Yeah.
and they were all basically rotting apart. I thought, oh man, this can be another one of those movies. And then of course it had pseudo happy ending, which was good. Um, and it for me it felt uplifting, and I thought, good, you didn't go down that route where the ending has to be this just complete drudgery, which has been happening in so many westerns. I just don't want the next generation of people to grow up thinking, oh, the West was just such a miserable place. I mean, if it
Yeah.
was such a miserable place, we wouldn't have. I almost said California, um, Hollywood, which is in California. So, I mean, it wasn't that miserable of a place. I know
Yeah.
it could be,
And,
but
well, I was
that
gonna say, there's when it comes to like the old west and people's perceptions of it. I mean, I think anybody I think people are so focused on their creature comforts, right? Oh, a time where there wasn't running water or toilet paper. I couldn't do that. Sounds like misery. Like, no, no, those are just things that you didn't have. You could still be happy without things.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's a book that I reference a lot that was written by a saloon keeper out here in Tucson in the 1870s. Um, his name was George Hand, and he had the saloon downtown. And it's by and large, it's kind of boring because he's like, oh, another day, nothing going on, really hot. Saw a dog. The mail stage came in, got drunk, went to sleep. But other times you can see that there's really exciting things for them, things that we take for granted. I always used to laugh at the fact that people would tell me that in this small town in Kentucky, Missouri, wherever, these people in the 20s would go out and set their chairs out by the train station so they could watch the train come by. That was their excitement on a Saturday night. And I thought, whoa, that's silly. But you know what? I mean, things have changed so much. Technology has really changed our lives so drastically. But if we had to go back to that, I tell you what, I'd be really excited to see a train go by.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that, and I mean, also, it kind of just like shows the type of community that they had back then. That if you're going to sit there on a Saturday night and wait for a train to come in, I mean, you're going to have a large portion of the town greeting who's ever coming in on that train. So, it just, I don't know, it just goes to show you the kind of warm nature they had back then for the most part, which I mean, most people, if you're just going off of, the pop culture renditions of the old West, they think it's, such a gritty time that people, didn't have the manners like they did.
Yeah. It's funny you should say that. I get people who ask me, what are cowboys really like nowadays? And I have met so many of these old cowboys, and they come off as standoffish when you first meet them. They just, they answer in one word sentences.
Yeah.
But then you get that right question for them and they won't shut up. I mean, they literally will not stop talking to you. You just had to hit that sweet spot with them when you asked them, hey, what was it like in the 1950s or whatever, and oh boy, they just won't shut up, and then they're your best friends by the end of the night. It's really amazing. um, and I have a feeling that that's kind of what the old west was like. I think people were a little bit like, I don't know who you are, I don't know if you're here to do me harm or
Mhm.
if you're here to help me, because a lot of people have done me harm in the past, and I am a tough frontiersman, so I'm not going to be treated badly. But once they get an idea of who you are, then they're all buddy buddy with you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, they warm up. Well, I guess kind of going back like the cowboy archetype. When I talk about like modern representations, I mean, just because I was a '90s kid, the one that sticks out with me the most is Jack Palance from City Slickers.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
he just like exactly how you said. He's really standoffish and like hard around the edges kind of guy. But
that's
when
the guy. That's the guy right
yeah,
there, Jack Lance. Yep. Sorry to
but
interrupt.
I mean, when you get like later on in the film and he starts, warming up to Billy Crystal's character, he gives him that one piece of advice that, life is just this one thing and you got to figure it out. And that is by found not only is it one of the most simplistic yet profound things ever said, but that's just one of the best pieces of dialogue, that back and forth in film history. I mean, it really resonates years later because it's that kind of timeless wisdom.
It is, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Cowboy wisdom is a big thing that we sort of associate with nowadays, right? For some reason, we think that they knew everything. They were, well, obviously they didn't, but It's kind of funny, It's here's an interesting thing about Jack Palance. Did you know that he was not good at riding a horse?
I did
He
not know that.
he hated horses. Well, hated is a strong word. He disliked riding horses very strongly. Um, so I just thought I'd tell you that in case you were wondering. Not all Western actors were as comfortable as Glenn Ford on a horse. So
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel like that sense of like inner wisdom kind of comes along with like, that Western archetype, that stoic guy who, because he's removed from the modern world, he just has time to sit and think and
right,
reflect upon life, upon nature. And, it's kind of like an American Zen master, you know what I mean? Because that is a form of meditation when you're just sitting and reflecting on things. And, granted, these guys probably aren't as deep as we want to give them credit to. Let's be honest, they were simple, hard men, but but I mean, it's just a different perspective on life, and it's that kind of simplistic perspective that a lot of folks in the modern era, like, they want to resonate with and they want to connect with because I don't know, it's just something primal about it.
if you read any of these cowboy sayings books, wisdom of the frontier type
Mhm.
things, a lot of them are towards what you're saying. They're basically don't talk too much, just listen. And if you feel you need to say something, say it. So that I have a feeling that you had a lot of that going on back then. Anybody who came to town like me and was overly boisterous and jovial and glib was probably frowned upon.
Yeah.
Who is this guy? What is he trying to sell us? What's going on with him? What the hell has he got going on? I think there was a lot of that, a lot of silence. I was doing some research this week on this week's episode and on musical instruments, and I found out that after looking at about a dozen pictures of saloons, I could not find one piano.
Really?
And I thought to myself, let me do some research on this. And I realized that this whole piano idea in the tinkling piano in the saloon thing is also a Hollywood invention for the most part. And I think that most of these saloons were really just meeting places for men to one, get away from the women in their lives, and two, to just hang out and be men, and to
Yeah.
talk about men stuff, guy stuff, um, without the distractions of entertainment or anything. So, and then just get drunk together. So, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, well, I find that's going to be interesting for next week as well because I mean, like I was telling you, I play the banjo and I also play the mandolin, and I'm a big fan of the history of folk music as well. And the most common instruments that you had seen in that era were just a combination of a banjo and a fiddle, because when a lot of the original banjo music that was written was actually copied off of fiddle music because the five string hadn't really been around yet. So a lot of those instruments were only four string banjos. And because those the four string tenor banjos were tuned, if the Irish tuning, it would be tuned in perfect fifths like a violin. So the notes would be the same on the fretboards because they cut those ones a little bit shorter down. So yeah, the biggest combination of instruments that you'd see, in hootenannies, hoedowns, barn burners, and box socials would be that combination of the banjo and the fiddle. And if you listen to some of that old timey music, I mean, man, it just cuts you right to the soul because a lot of it's still based on that old gospel stuff.
sure, yeah, because I mean the real popularity of the banjo came from the slaves,
Yeah,
and I thought it was interesting when I was reading about it. I thought they taught their masters. I hate to use that term nowadays, but that was what it was back then. They
yeah.
taught their masters how to play the banjo because they were interested. Let's learn the banjo, and there were books out on it. And I think that you hit the nail right on the head. I didn't know about the five string thing. I need to do a little more research. That's pretty interesting. Um,
Yeah, the original, well, I wouldn't say the original, but the modern idea of the banjo of like that, like, that like Scruggs style, like three finger picking, and that Bill Monroe style bluegrass, like that really, like the bluegrass banjo really came around in the 20th century and
right,
really kind of grew off of the different kinds
drugs
of
and all
like
that
country
stuff, right?
music. Yeah, yeah. But if you go like back further, with the history of the banjo, it was four strings and it was, like you said, mostly used in minstrel shows at the time. But
Just-
yeah, but just that Yeah, well, I mean, when you had different folk instruments and you really didn't have like full bands together, I mean, like you said, they didn't have pianos, so a lot of those times, I bet it was just whoever played instruments sitting together and just kind of jamming around until they found something that worked.
Yeah, I think that was a lot of what it was. You had harmonicas, you had the Jew's harp, also
Yeah,
called the Jaws harp, and the mouth harp. You had all those like little. I would imagine you probably even had a wash tub bass, but I don't know for sure. But I would imagine that anything that you could make music with back then to get everybody's spirits up would probably be a good thing. It's not like we can just go pop on a YouTube video like Arizona Ghostrides and enjoy ourselves. They had to entertain themselves a little bit. So
yeah, and I feel that's what made I don't know. I feel like that's what made folks more industrious back then. Is that like if you wanted to be entertained, you had to work for it. You didn't even have a TV, you didn't have a radio. You either had to read a book or you had to get together with people and make your own entertainment. And I don't know, like maybe it's just me longing for a simpler time. But I feel with the modern world that we have, so many people are just so constantly distracted that the mere second they get a little bit bored, they just don't know what to do with themselves. And you know what? You can't always rely on technology or, the media that's presented with you to fill that time. You got to learn to do stuff yourself.
yeah, yeah. I see a lot of that. I work in customer service, and so I see a lot of that. And I'd like to say I only see it in kids, but no, I see it in adults too. And I found myself yesterday at the Toyota dealership waiting for my car to get finished. I was doing it too, and I thought, wow, we really have adopted technology. Um, anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I think it's pretty fascinating. You play the banjo. I love that instrument. I think, what, if I had any regrets in life, I think it would be that I didn't actually learn the banjo. I just love the sound of a banjo. How long have
Yeah.
you been doing it?
Well, I mean, I won't say I play the banjo well. I know most of my major chords, I know my minors, and I know like three scales because when it comes to banjo, all you need to know is C, G, and D. But but I've been playing that one for about 5 years, and then I picked up the mandolin about 3 years ago. And given that I have pretty small hands, I fit with the mandolin a lot better
Mm.
because everything's like right there and in the top. I'd say probably like the top 6 frets, so you can just kind of dance around. And the thing that I disliked about the banjo is that the banjo makes you work for it. You really got to stretch out your hands and
Oh, really?
yeah, and kind of like set in that muscle memory because like it took me about 2 years before I could even do a full F chord. Like banjo gets rough if you don't have like big hands. But
Mm,
I mean, same with like guitar or any of these like or any of these longer necked instruments. The frets are just a little bit further spaced out.
mm. Interesting. Wow. Well, I'm glad you enjoy it. That's an important thing, you know, because I love
Yeah,
the sound of a banjo. I think everybody kind of equates it with the Old West too, and the fiddle, like you said, the fiddle. You
yeah.
know, everybody remembers Pa on Little House on the Prairie whipping out that fiddle at every kind of anytime he wasn't crying, Michael Landon was playing the fiddle. Sorry, sorry,
Yeah,
Michael Landon family. Part he cried a lot. Let's face it.
yeah, well, I mean, House on the Prairie was I don't know, man. I always considered it like a lifetime movie of TV shows back then
Right.
because it was always like emotionally drama focused. But I mean, you always know there was going to be a happy ending at the end, it's Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, even though the majority of the town died from cholera, the Ingalls family was doing okay.
They're just there to swoop it
And
all
Nellie
up.
Olson was still alive to be a pain in the rump. So that's good, as long as those characters are there, right?
And now
Anyway.
see that's something that like kind of like gets under my skin as well as like we were talking about kids not knowing these old Western movies like that a kid will not know what Little House on the Prairie is nowadays. So it kind of like goes over their head. But I don't know. I feel like there's at least in modern pop culture, there's been a reemergence of the Western pretty hard. And we were talking about happy Westerns or I don't know, I guess Westerns that just aren't depressing. I want to
Right.
ask, did you
Better word. Yeah.
see It was probably one of my favorite westerns of the last few years. The films that the Coen brothers have been doing have been phenomenal. Their remake of True Grit was
Yeah.
top notch. I didn't
Buster
think that.
Scruggs, great movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say Buster Scruggs
Yeah.
really resonated with me because it kind of like picks up that like tall tales, like folksy,
Oh
um,
yeah.
kind of aesthetic, and it I don't know, I'll just all those little short stories really go ahead, and like mind you, some of them are really sad, like the one with where they had like the
Spoiler
traveling.
alert! Spoiler alert!
Yeah, yeah, with Liam Neeson. I mean, ooh, he's a bastard. Yeah, he's a bastard in that one. But then you get like the musical ones that are just really lighthearted and fun. I mean,
Yeah,
I feel like that movie was phenomenal.
it really was. And I like you said, I loved that tall tale aspect of it, and the fact that they kept going back to the end, the last paragraph of that story. I was like, boy, you guys are wow. The costuming was good. The sets were good. The I didn't know what to expect when I saw the first segment.
Yeah,
I thought, oh, the whole movie is going to be about this outlandishly dressed guy who is the most amazing gunslinger in the world, and then he dies, and I was like, oh, well, wait a minute. So now where are we going to go? And then it took into another segment. I guess I didn't get it. I didn't read the synopsis, but I just thought the whole thing was brilliant. I can't say anything bad about the whole. I'm Tom Waits as a minor. I mean, oh my gosh. Anyway, it's great. The whole
yeah,
thing was great.
I just love when Tom Waits shows up in anything.
Yeah,
Even like those like weird like oh god, what was the name of that movie? It was a super surreal movie. I think it was called like The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, and like
something like
Tom
that. Yeah.
Waits
Whoa,
just
I didn't see that.
shows up as the devil, and he's like dressed in like a bowler hat and like a tuxedo, so he's like really like like Snidely Whiplash style
Right.
villain, which is great. But I love seeing Tom Waits in anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was pretty amazing, and I think that the Coen brothers did a terrific job with it. You're right on. And when I mentioned that a lot of the movies that I'd seen were depressing, I didn't think about Buster Scruggs because it's not. And there are a few people. There's a lot of independent westerns out there. I was recently in one that had a really great feel good idea. It was kind of a hallmarky type feel to it,
Okay.
and I was glad to see that. A lot of the times when I get hired to do movies, and a lot of us out here get hired to do these independent movies, we don't know anything. We don't know what it's going to be like. We don't know if it's going to be any good, and we certainly don't know if it's going to be a really depressing movie. But we want to be a part of it. Um, so I hope that people make more upbeat ones. We need that Clint Eastwood hero back. I
Yeah.
think maybe that would help. John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Gary
Well,
Cooper.
I don't know.
Michael
America's
Scott.
always been so like hero centric too. I feel like that's why superhero movies are, doing so big at the box office is because, Captain America, he represents that same kind of stoic character that, he's not going to bend his values or his integrity for anything.
Right,
And that's what really makes the Western resonate with people is just that timeless kind of valiant hero. And I don't know. The thing that I love about those independent westerns is that the reason why the western was so prevalent in the early days of Hollywood is because of how cheap it was to make. You could reuse sets, reuse costumes, reuse horses. You just had to change actors, and they and then you really didn't even have to change actors because they just rotate them out every now and
yeah,
again.
that's right. Yeah,
I mean, how
yeah,
many different villains did Lee Van Cleef play? I
right,
mean, in a Dollars trilogy, he's playing too, right? Uh, but uh, but because they were so cheap to make, they were able to crank them out.
yeah,
That's what I love about independent films getting into the Western genre is because they're doing it for the same reasons. But you know, I love seeing movies that are made outside of the studio influence, right? So it's more true to the creator's intent, depressing or not, right?
right. Absolutely, yeah. And I think you're right on. The one good thing I can say about all of these, even the depressing westerns, I'm going to create a new genre, depressing westerns, is that they're really paying a lot more attention than they did back in the 60s and 70s to period correct stuff, which I think is fascinating. and it's obviously important to me as a sort of a armchair historian, but it's just really great that they even care to pay attention to that. You know, I wish I could. I wish I could get hired as a historian on a film. I think that would be really cool. Um, I probably would lose a lot, but still, it's the fact that you can sit there and say, "Yeah, that shirt's right," or "That gun belt's right," or "Wait a minute, they didn't have bottles like that back then." You know, any of those things. Um, they really pay a lot more attention than he did in the 70s. For instance, the spaghetti westerns, all filmed in Spain and Italy
Mhm.
and other places. Um, they didn't care that much, but they did care. They cared a little bit because a lot of it is right. You know, they get some things right in those movies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I sometimes I love like rewatching those movies and just learning of the historical inaccuracies. Like I want to say, looking at the spaghetti westerns, there's a scene in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly when Eli Washer Tuco like goes into the store and he's just like throwing like random gun parts together. He's taking like
Yeah,
part of a Colt, a part of a Schofield, and he's just like creating this gun that would never be able to historically shoot. But
correct.
I mean, it just kind of like focuses on like the detail and like I don't know, just actually how complex those little guns were. I mean,
Right,
people don't really realize how much ingenuity went into everything that they had back then because it had to. They were doing
right.
most of that stuff by hand. They didn't have machines and factories to make that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that one's particularly funny because of the fact that behind him in the street, a Civil War battle is going on. Uh, and he's putting together a cartridge gun that, anyway, it's kind of funny. But yeah, it's that kind of thing we like. I think the spaghetti westerns are really good because they show the grittiness and the dirtiness, and they show these like little towns that are made of adobe huts, which I would assume the a lot of the old west in the southern portion where I live was like. I've seen pictures. They look like those sets
Yeah.
in Italy and in Spain. It was just run down little old hovels. Uh, and the fact that everybody was so dirty, yeah, I would like to think they would probably wash their face every once in a while back then, but boy, in the spaghetti westerns, they didn't care. Everybody had to look like they've been working on the bottom of a car for a week, you know.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, even though it's not technically a spaghetti western, I feel like the era of the traditional western kind of ended or came full circle with Unforgiven, which is probably outside of Once Upon a Time in the West my favorite western. Just
Uh,
everything about that thematically, kind of the deconstruction of those deconstructionalist westerns in a way, because I mean it's not overtly supposed to be the man with no name, but interviews that he wanted to bring that same spirit to kind of bring closure to that whole saga, which I thought
hmm,
was phenomenal.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, the whole William Money thing, and I mean, how can you go wrong with Gene Hackman as the bad guy? I mean,
Yeah.
you cannot go wrong if you have Gene Hackman as your bad guy. You just can't. But wow, I never thought of it in that light. That's thank you so much. That's interesting. You
Yeah,
know,
well, I mean, I don't know. I love that movie, and actually, a funny story about that. So, I had this history teacher in high school, and he knew I was into the Old West. So, and I had a bunch of westerns. So he was just like, you know what? Hey, Jimmy, I just want Friday to be a blow off day, right? So just bring in, I don't know, we'll watch some old Western. I'm like, okay, I can bring in some DVDs. So I go and I just grab like 5 or 6 DVDs, and I just bring them all in. And I just Unforgiven was in the lot. There was probably a spaghetti western and probably Shane in there as well as High Noon, and he chooses Unforgiven because he had never seen it before. And then he pops it in the DVD player during history class. Then it opens on that scene where he's cutting the whore in the whorehouse,
yeah.
and he just like rushes across the room, flips over his desk to try and get there in
And
time.
you said, should have told you. Sorry, he didn't
Oh
ask.
yeah, that was right. Oh yeah,
Whoops.
sorry, forgot about that opening scene. My bad.
Yeah, keep it playing. Yeah,
But
yeah,
I don't know, like that film went out of its way to be historically accurate as well. I feel like a lot of the Clint Eastwood westerns when he was directing, he tried
yeah.
to keep it as realistic as possible because Pale Rider
Mostly.
is another
Yeah.
one that's great.
Mostly, yeah. You know, it's funny. I was going to say the funny thing about that movie that always makes you laugh is the fact that every time the actor speaking tells the story of what the cowboys did to the girl, they always add something, cut her
Yeah.
eyes out, cut her head off, disemboweled her. Anyway, yeah, Clint Eastwood is usually pretty good about that stuff. Although Pale Rider, honestly, there's a lot of I don't know why he did it. I wasn't sure what he was thinking, and maybe he didn't care. But the scene where he goes and he kills the John Russell character at the end of the movie, he's
Mhm.
walking down and he's loading his percussion firearm. Yet he's got a whole belt full of cartridges. And he's also taking the cylinder out and reloading it, which is not unheard of.
Yeah.
But the whole thing just didn't make sense. And I thought, well, what was Clint thinking of at that moment? What was going through his mind? Because most people don't care. You may not care unless you know about percussion firearms and cartridge firearms. But I saw it when even as a kid, I knew the difference. I thought, well, wait a minute, why has he got both of those on his gun belt? I don't know what's going on here. So, um, so Clint is not always perfect in that respect, but none of them were.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I don't think. Well, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I guess there's that. There's a whole like subgenre of westerns that are just those westerns that are purposely over the top, because like you look at like a movie like Django Unchained, like everything about that movie is just completely over the top
right?
and
And it's supposed to be because
exaggerate. Yeah, exaggerated.
Quentin Tarantino knows better. He does. He loves the genre. He knows better. He just wanted it to be that.
Yeah.
The Hateful Eight is a good example. Did you see the Hateful Eight?
I love the Hateful. I liked Hateful Eight a lot more than I like Django Unchained because Django's got the style, but Hateful Eight has the substance. Like that is just a grounded,
Right.
realistically driven character drama.
Right. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. People ask me, well, what's it like? And I said, did you ever see the Inglorious Bastards? Oh yeah. Remember that scene in that bar underneath the ground? The whole movie is that scene. It's just stretched out. You have that suspense, you have that distrust. Um, but boy, as much as Hateful Eight is kind of a rough movie to watch, um, as far as the language and the violence and all that stuff goes, it's really
Yeah.
entertaining and he did a great job. See, so that's why I'm telling you, he knows what he's doing. He just knew that Django had to be a stereotype of that genre.
Yeah.
That's what he was trying to do.
Yeah, and well, I mean, I don't know. I liked Hateful Eight
Basically.
quite a bit because as well because it focuses on something that you don't often see in the old west, which is wintertime. There's
Yeah,
most westerns, they take place in like you based out of Arizona, Texas, really down in the southwest region. But looking at different regions within that era, you look at the different ways that they had to survive, and I mean, just how dependent they had to be on each other when something as simple as a big snowstorm had come through, you know?
right. And you have to think about the fact that in that stagecoach station, I think it was a stagecoach. It was a stagecoach station, right?
Yeah.
They had one fireplace. That was it. Heating that whole room. Um, Now, once again, I live down south. It's been a long time since I've been up north. I don't know if a fireplace can emanate that much heat just from the front of it and warm a room. Maybe it can, but it's funny because you watch it and they're all still wearing their coats halfway through the movie. So it was cold. You
Oh
know?
yeah. Well, and one of the interesting factoids about that one as well is that Quentin Tarantino went out of his way to make sure that the heat was not working and that they were working in those extreme cold temperatures. So whenever you see like the breath come out of their mouths, like that's actually because they were a lot of that was filmed in a freezer, so that was all real. That wasn't CGI added in, which takes it to a whole new level of dedication.
Boy, I tell you, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Huh. Wow. Thanks for educating me on that. That's cool.
Yeah, that was probably my favorite. I mean, as far as like examples of modern westerns that really, gets the feel right, Hateful Eight goes at the top of that list because there's not too many made these days. And when something that good comes out, it just kind of I don't know, just kind of gives you some appreciation for the things that had come in the past. I mean, even something like was even though I didn't like the seasons that came after, Westworld I thought was a phenomenal show. And even if you were to like remove all the sci-fi elements out of it and just stick on those flashback sequences where they're going through the park, and having that old west style adventure, you could cut that to where it's just a western based on that alone.
Yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed that. I haven't seen this season though because I understand they're no longer in Westworld
Yeah, that's why I'm not
and they're
necessarily
somewhere
here.
out in the world. So I haven't. I think the season's out, isn't it? But whatever. I haven't really seen it because at this point it doesn't seem like Westworld to me. But I understand the idea, and it was really cool. I mean, who wouldn't want that, right? And it wasn't in the original Westworld and in this one. It wasn't just Westworld. It was, I think it was Roman World in the
Yeah,
original one and some other worlds.
yeah, they had a
They had
samurai
something
world.
to tweak everybody's fantasy. So I thought that was kind of cool. And um, I mean, who wouldn't want that? That sounds cool. You think you're shooting a snake, but you're really shooting a robot. That's
I mean, I would love. I don't want to say the extent of where Westworld goes with like the violence and debauchery, but I love the idea of like if you had like a large acreage that you could have built a small town on and had people come out and just go camping out on it in like period tents and stuff, using all period stuff, of course you send out like a guide with them, right? But just something about being on horseback, camping out under the stars, in the middle of nowhere, and actually being able to get away from this modern world. I don't know,
right.
something about that I think just resonates with people.
Not even a little bit of debauchery.
I mean, just we'll keep
Fine.
it PG-13.
Okay. All right. Fine. Yeah. It's funny. Arizona Red, who you've seen in some videos, and Dirty Dan and I, and some of the others, we've always wanted to like go out and just camp and do the whole living history Old West thing. And for the most part, when we do all hang out together, we're kind of Old West, even though we've got trucks and everything like that. But it's still the feel of it. And yeah, I think there's a part of it that just really, like you said, resonates with you. That attraction to that time when lawlessness was evident all over the place and you were a guy with a gun, or maybe you didn't have a gun, and you had to take care of things. I mean, it was just a really interesting time, interesting time to build up a whole region. It's my gosh, it's amazing what they did, and the fact that they lost people on the way, and then
Yeah.
when they got here, they lost people. I mean, I can't remember the percentage, but I think it was one. Was it one or two of every three kids? I can't remember the percentage, but it was ridiculously high. So you can only imagine that they thought, well, we have three children now. Hopefully, we'll have one when this is all over. you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, particularly when you're talking about like wagon trains going through territory that, I mean, hasn't even really
Dysentery and
been mapped
cholera.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Man, I remember playing the Oregon Trail as a kid. I would never make it through
yeah,
the whole game. I always died of dysentery.
right. So which was really a true thing. So one of the things that's interesting, and I mentioned this in one of my videos, is that you basically had people following the same trail. That's why you have wagon ruts that are so you can see them today. The wagon ruts in the rocks and the stones and the dirt are so deep because the same wagons just went through it. So the party that was just through the day before, you go and you camp at their campsite. Well, guess what? There's flies there, and those flies are carrying germs,
Yeah,
bacteria rather, and they land in your food, and that's it. You could get it. They knew about it. They knew better, but it was a time of trying to get things done, and your main goal was to get west. That was why you left the east, is to get west, to start a life, to start your business, whatever, to find gold, whatever it was.
yeah.
So you tended to forget about those things don't apply to me, and then you get cholera and you die. So yeah, okay, weird.
Yeah. I mean, it just took a lot of just pure determination because, I mean, even after you had, settled like it. Even when your wagons make it all the way to where you want it to be, you build and settle up a nice little town. There's nothing to stop the Comanches from just coming through and just burning the entire thing to the ground first chance
Right.
they get, because so much of that area was just, I mean, there would have been no response for the military in weeks afterwards, and if someone stumbled upon it and was able to report it. But I guess that's what made the railroad so important, right?
Yes.
Is that now that you have this railroad system, you have these towns that are continually going to be in contact. And, with the railroad, then came the telegram, and you're able to communicate back and forth, report, different things that happen, whether it's, unlaw or, outlaws, Indians, whatever the case may be. I mean, so really, the story of the West is, the story of conquering that last bit of unexplored area in the world, and really the complete colonization. And I don't want to say I don't want to say the complete subjugation of Mother Earth, but it's really when mankind really was able to establish the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Um, since I started the channel, and I really didn't know what the channel was going to become at that point, I've been contacted by people from other countries: Sweden, Norway, New Zealand, Denmark, Belgium. All these people have contacted me and said, "Guess what? We have Old West towns here. We reenact the Civil War. We
What?
reenact the Old West." Um, they reenact stuff in America, and I think that's because of what you just said. I mean, the Old West was such. Uh, we think it's just a turning point for us, but I think it was a turning point for everybody around the world. And I
Yeah.
think in some countries they had their own Old West. Australia had their own Old West. New Zealand kind of, I guess, had their own Old West. In a way, all of these people had their own version of the Old West, which is people going out and saying, you know what, forget this stuff I'm doing here. My house is burned. The government's taken this, whatever. I'm going to go start another life in this area that there's nobody at except outlaws and Native Americans or indigenous people. Maybe that's a better
Yeah.
way to say it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just risk it all and I'm going to start a life and I'm going to start a business and we're going to tie these two places together and everything's going to be amazing. The fact that people did that all over the world and in their different frontiers, I think that they all associate that with our Old West.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know, that's just the story of humanity, right? You have these city states get developed, and then you have the people who want to do that exact same thing. So they become traders, go along the Silk Road, visiting all those different places, trying to start their own life, their own business. And that's, I mean, well, then once you see, those other places get conquered under the Roman Empire, you see those people flee to the New World to get away from the structures of power. So really, it is really the story of humanity is that story of getting away from these structures of power to forge your own path. And
Right.
I don't know, there's just something that there's just something purposeful in that idea. It's something that you can
Sure.
bring to your own life philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. But what's funny is we don't reenact, well, I say that in general, we don't reenact the Roman era here in America that
Yeah,
much,
yeah.
but we sure as heck reenact the Old West. People in Sweden, I don't know if they reenact the Roman era very much, but and they sure reenact the Old West. So it's something about that era, and it's probably because of Hollywood, quite frankly, and
Right.
novels, dime novels, books, um, legendary heroes that you say sort of spurred on the superheroes of today. I think it's a much more important genre than we think it is.
Yeah, I mean, Noah, you had brought up the dime novels and the pulp novels at the time, and if it wasn't for those kind of publications, you would have never had the comic book boom. In fact, if you look back at the majority of publications at the time, when comic books first started coming around, they were mostly all westerns. I mean, we remember them for the superheroes, but I mean, if you go to a Comic Con, and I write comic books for a small print publisher.
Wow.
So yeah, so I'm always at these cons, and you always see just long boxes and long boxes and long boxes filled with all of these old cowboy comics that people just kind of overlook. There's not really a demand for them, but I
I
mean,
used to read Billy the Kid. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I mean, there's some excellent writing in there, and a lot of them were just adaptations of what had already been written in those dime novels, right? Just for a younger audience that didn't have to read as much. But I mean, there's excellent stories there, and I mean, there's a reason why that influenced that superhero archetype so much. It's the same kind of like simplistic value set, that unrelenting integrity that really resonates with people on a deep psychological level.
Right. Right. And I think you you have this hero, right? Whether it's a bad guy or whether it's a good guy. The bad guy always seems to be not so bad. He always seems to have a glimmer of good in him,
Yeah.
and he saves the girl. And although it's not his normal thing, he tends to be the good guy. And at the end, very end of the movie or the dime novel, he's a good guy. Um, he's the best they had, and he took care of everybody. And I think that's something we all sort of in a way fell in love with.
Yeah.
We all wanted to be that guy. We didn't want to be Dudley Do Right walking and saving the day. We wanted to be Snidely Whiplash. Wait, was he the anti to Dudley Do Right? Whatever. Anyway,
I
we wanted
believe
to be the
so.
bad guy. What?
I said I believe you're right. I think that was Snidely Whiplash.
We wanted to be the bad guy, but we also wanted to have sort of a good. So the anti-hero that Clint Eastwood was, I think that's why we like him so much. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, I mean, even if you look at like, the modern superhero films, like you see, I mean, even modern Hollywood in general, you start seeing, these Western tropes. Like, I don't know if you've watched the movie Logan when it came out.
I did watch Logan. Yeah, but he said it's very Western. Watch it.
Logan is a very Western movie. The
Yeah.
idea of this guy protecting, the younger generation from, the influences or the negative influences around him. I mean, it's very Shanish.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is very, yeah, you're right.
Or
Which, by the way,
True
is a
Grit as
really good
well.
movie. You mentioned it a couple times now. Shane is an excellent movie.
Love that
When
movie.
people, sadly, I don't think I put Shane on my top 10 Westerns list. And I think that's because I didn't see Shane until I was over 30 years old. It
Oh,
just
really?
wasn't, yeah, it just wasn't a thing I saw for whatever reason. It was not on TV. But I saw it later and I thought, wow, this is a really good Western. Um, it's so many things good about it. So if anybody out there is watching and says, what's a good first Western to watch? Um, you've said Unforgiven. I say Unforgiven is good too, but Shane is another one. High Noon is good too, but I don't know. High Noon is more psychological, I think.
Yeah, High Noon has very distinct imagery, right? It's particularly it's like uses of the clocks and like counting down Gary Cooper's his potentially like his last moments to live. And I mean, really, the thing that I think is so allegorical about High Noon is that you see these images of the clocks and it's counting down to the showdown that's inevitable, and almost like with either more our sense of mortality or any adversity in our lives, it's inevitable that we're going to have to face that adversity with courage. And Gary Cooper goes around, he looks for as many people to help as he can, and everyone turns him down. The townspeople turn him down, the preacher turns him down. And really, when it comes to life's challenges and what we have to face in life, we're inevitably going to do that by our own strength, no matter who's helping us along the way.
Right. And if you watch that film a couple times, actually, you don't even have to watch it a couple times. Watch that sequence, that last sequence where he's walking down and he knows that the brothers are in town. He's sweating and he's darting, his eyes are darting around. He's nervous, he's scared. He is visibly scared.
Yeah.
Which up until that point, we've really just sort of seen him as this stoic character who is just annoyed that nobody will help him, and he is nervous. He's got this whole thing going on with the fact that he just got married, and his wife is a Quaker and she's on the way out of town. His whole life is ruined, but
Mhm.
he's got to take care of this thing. and now he's scared. And that is in my opinion, it's the best part of the whole movie is when he's sweating profusely and he's licking his lips and he's looking around like, I don't know what to do. I can't do this. I'm not going to pull this off, but I got it. That's that's right there. That's the whole thing. That's the old west right there in that
Yeah.
one moment. You know?
Yeah, it's just I don't know, it's just taking the initiative, right, to take responsibility for these things, when it comes to whether it's settling an entire wilderness, right, or if it's just taking responsibility for setting up your own life. Like, that's the thing that really resonates about the old west is, as hard as it was, like, people always manned up and did what they had to do.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you're absolutely right. And there's things I look at nowadays that I didn't used to look at when I watch Western movies.
Mhm.
Jack Palance, for instance, in Shane, is so in control. He knows he's the best, but he doesn't exactly know he's the best when he's facing Shane.
Right.
And you can see that in his eyes. You can see that in the way he sort of shrinks back into the wall. He's not as it's kind of like the Johnny Ringo tombstone sequence with Doc Holliday, where he sits there and says, I don't want to go against Doc Holliday. He'll kill me. But then he has that moment where he flips over and he says, all right, Lunger, let's do it. Like, that was a really great. Did you like my Michael Bean? I worked on that. All right, Lunger. Anyway, the same thing happens with Jack Palance and a lot of these really well-made westerns, where they say, "Screw it, I'm going to do it," and it was a really bad mistake, but whatever. It was makes for great entertainment and really makes us love it a lot more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Tombstone as well, because I mean, we were talking about modern westerns. Like, that is one of the most iconic modern westerns, and
Yep.
I would say probably one of the better westerns to start folks on. So, if there's anybody, if there's anybody who is watching this right now that has just played Red Dead Redemption, I would say Tombstone and Shane are two great places to start, because they give you the complete opposite ends of the spectrum, and
Right.
really everything from the or idealistic western to the deconstructed western. It kind of gives you everything in between.
Right. I would say you're right about that. The turning point that Tombstone made in the cinema is the fact that the Peter Shreko and the costume designer, whose name I can't remember right now off the top of my head, really wanted to be accurate as possible, and they were faced with the fact that they kind of had to be, because there was Wyatt Earp was filming and so was Geronimo at the time. So literally, Western costume had nothing for them except bits and scraps, from what I understand.
Really?
So they made a lot of those. Kevin Char, no, that was the director. Whatever his name was, they all built these costumes from scratch. Peter Shareko was instrumental in helping them with that, and they worked so well with the designers that the Mescal movie set, which you've seen in some of my videos, really did look a lot like Tombstone. I mean, probably
Yeah.
closer to Tombstone actually looked than any other movie has ever depicted it. And they created that feel. So when you look at that first panning shot, when they go into Tombstone, you feel like you've stepped into the old west. Like that must be what it felt like coming into a town, a rich mining town that was just hopping. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, you had said that you go out to that the film studio where you shoot your videos at now. How many different westerns have been shot at that location that you've been involved in?
Well, I shoot it. I shoot a lot of stuff at Trail Dust Town, which is a theme park. Well, I wouldn't really call it a theme park. It's a restaurant with a theme park built around it here in
Gotcha.
Tucson. I worked at Old Tucson, and I hope to work there again if they ever open up again from the pandemic. But Old Tucson has filmed over 300, maybe 400 westerns at this point. A good handful of John Wayne movies like Rio Bravo, El Dorado, and I think Rio Lobo was filmed there. And of course, a bunch of Clint Eastwood westerns were filmed there too. So it is a really amazing set to be on when you're there. It's just amazing to look at.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out now because the Southwest is an area I haven't had a chance to like really go and vacation and kind of explore yet, and that's definitely on my to-do list. So when the Arizona Ghost Riders, are fully active, how many different shows do you hit up in the state per year?
Um, Boy, I tell you, it's kind of weird. One year there, we were doing. I know it seems like a little bit, but we were doing about 8 shows. We were kind of all over the place for a while there, but we're dealing with a lot of issues that prevent us and people like us from doing shows. You've got events, street shows, that street events or historical events that don't necessarily want a bunch of gunfighters out there slinging lead and shooting each other
Right.
because there's going to be kids there. There's a lot of that going on right now, a lot of anti-gun going on, and they just don't want it. So we don't do as much as we would like to, but we have done a lot in the Western genre in towns like Mescal and Old Tucson Studios and Prescott, Arizona, all those little towns that are Old West who embrace their Old West. There's a lot of towns that don't embrace their Old West history out here. Uh, Tucson's one of them, actually.
I find that so surprising.
I know it's really shocking. We tried to do a show downtown during an event, and they said no, we don't want Old West. Okay, we don't
Huh.
want you even dressed up. We don't want you to have guns on. Okay, we won't wear guns. We don't want you dressed up. Oh, okay. So you just don't want us here, right? We don't want the Old West represented at this event, a historical event. It's weird.
Yeah, for Tucson in particular, because what other, era can you focus on the history of? I mean, I guess maybe, post-industrial revolution, 50s and 60s and stuff like that. But
We
I don't know. It's not really
we have
going
a
back to
rich we have
roots
a rich
historically.
Mexican culture here. Mexican and Indian culture is huge here. So if you go prior to the Old West, if you go back to the territorial days,
Right.
when prior to the Gadsden Purchase, when there was a fort, when Tucson was actually uh, a fort, a fortress to protect people from bad guys, Indians attacks and whatever. That's okay. They're okay with the Mexican colonial and the Indian raid type of stuff, but they just don't want the gunfighters. Texas, however, and California really embrace that. Texas more so than California. Texas is the place if you want to do gunfighting. That's where you go because they are all about the Texas Rangers. They're all about their history, and honestly, the gun solved a lot of their problems out there,
Oh
as you
yeah.
probably will know.
Yeah, well, I mean, particularly the Texas Rangers, like they were the first. Well, when the Cherokee were really bad down there, and
Oh yeah,
the Cherokee, the thing that set them apart is they were able to shoot their bows and arrows while they're standing horseback, and they could shoot 3 to 4 arrows at once because they just developed that skill. But the Texas Rangers were the first guys who were actually able to stabilize themselves while riding to be able to shoot rifles. That made them be able to actually compete with the Cherokee at the time. So I mean, yeah, the Texas Rangers, their entire history is so fascinating.
yeah. And imagine when the Colt Patterson revolver first came out, and now
Yeah.
they can have basically a bunch of rounds without having to reload. Imagine what the Indians said at that point. Like, what the heck do they have? Let's get the heck out of here.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go to Blockbuster. No, Blockbuster's closed. They can't go there. Sorry. But yeah, um, yeah, a lot of Old West history in Texas. I mean, there's Old West history all over this area, but Texas embraces it much more than we do. I think, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately, well, I'm in Illinois, so the only place you're gonna get any sort of like old west style history is gonna be down in Springfield at the state capitol. And actually, what's really cool, if you ever get a chance to go to Springfield, um, there is a right across from the old courthouse, and they've done it a number of times. They'll actually have like the camp outs with like the Union soldiers there, and they'll set up their camps, and they'll explain different utensils, stuff like that. So they do that about once a year, but there is a bookstore that is right across from it, and it's called Prairie Books, and they have some of the best collections of old documents that I have seen. Like I got a lithograph of the Lincoln assassination from 1865 from like one of the newspaper prints, and they just have large collections of just old lithographs, old newspapers from the era. And really, once you start like looking through and like fingering through all these old documents and books, it's I don't know, it really makes that history kind of come alive. And like, yeah, it's almost like you have a practical application for it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Uh, I feel that way when I have a lot of books too, but when I go to a research library or something and I see pictures I've never seen, because honestly, as you know, as being a historian as well, you see the same picture over and over again a
Mm.
lot. And when you see a different version of that picture, even if it's from a different angle or a different area, you get excited and you sit there and go,
Yeah.
"Wow, that's cool." I really enjoy that aspect of researching is finding stuff that I've never found at all before. A friend of mine just sent me a book on a clothier that is a catalog I've never seen before from the 1884, and it's got stuff in it that just blows my mind. And it's fascinating to me to see what they had back then. Even as far back as the Civil War. I think we all think, no, I say we all, not you, because you've been around them, but other people think the Civil War was this basically just 1 year later than the Revolutionary War, and that everything was so primitive. But boy, it really wasn't. Like you said, there was a lot of industrial stuff going on at that point, um, or was trying to, I guess, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, industry eventually is what won the North the war. They were able to just create more supplies than the South was able to manufacture. So, at the end of the day, I would say the Civil War was, one of those turning points for industry in this country because it kind of gave the North the incentive to spend on developing the infrastructure that would be necessary to, have large mass slaughterhouses, be able to have these like texture manufacturing places. So I mean really that's what won them the war.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, they had better food too,
Yeah, yeah, they definitely did.
and more of it.
Yeah, surprisingly too, because the South was like almost the breadbasket then, because we really didn't have the Midwest cleared out yet. And well, I guess since we're getting to the end of the show, I definitely want to touch on a few other things. So let me ask you, when you first started getting into history, or I guess when did you first start to take history seriously as a hobby?
When I was doing cowboy action shooting, let's get back to that.
Yeah.
So I'm over here in this range in Long Island, New York, Long Island, California. Wow, where was I going? I'm in this range in Long Island, New York, and I'm shooting, and I'm thinking I just don't feel right. I love shooting. I love shooting steel targets. It's fun, but I feel like I'm not in the history. And I started doing more research, and I thought, boy, I really hope I don't find out that all this history is going to bore me compared to what it was in in the movies I grew up with and
Right.
watching Gunsmoke, and it wasn't. As a matter of fact, I really took to it. So since the '90s, I've been really into the history of it. Um, the interesting thing for me is to associate that with my original passion, which is cinema, entertainment. How
Mhm.
do I make those two work together so that I can still enjoy myself? A lot of people say, well, you don't need the movies, you don't need TV. The history is interesting in itself. It is. It is. It is fascinating in itself. But you, I have to bring in that Clint Eastwood and that John Wayne. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I have to bring in Alan Ladd every once in a while. I have to, or otherwise it's not the same to me. So how do I make those things work? So I'm constantly looking for ways that those people existed, and I find them. Well, you don't find Alan Ladd in the Old West, obviously, but I found people like Alan Ladd. I find the Gary Coopers. They're there. We just have to look for them.
Yeah. So out of all the guys that you've kind of looked into, outlaw or lawman, I guess which one have you come to, I don't want to say idolize, but which one have you said you resonated with the most?
Well, honestly enough, I would say Bill Brazelton, but he had such a short career that I don't know if I would really idolize him so much. I just think that it's one of those situations where he was pretty smart. He really was. His mistake was that he didn't realize that there would be an Apache tracker on his trail. That's really what it came down to. If there had not been an Apache tracker, he would have probably robbed a few more places and gone to a different state and continued the whole thing again. Um, I guess I probably would idolize somebody like, I don't know a lot about him, but I think I would probably idolize somebody like Jesse James. You know, I mean, he uh, he robbed the very first bank essentially.
Yeah.
He was a pretty smart character, and he had all that power from being a guerrilla fighter in the Civil War. He had all that knowledge of guerrilla fighting and all that stuff that was going on in his psyche. He knew so much. And I think that him and his brother Frank obviously were the driving force of that whole outfit. I think they just got a little too full of themselves at the end there.
Yeah, well, that and they trusted
Which
Robert
happens to
Ford as well,
what's
which was,
that?
well, that and they trusted Robert Ford as well, who would eventually betray him. So, it really is, they trusted the wrong guy.
And wasn't Robert Ford like a distant cousin?
I thought he was someone that they had picked up along the way, but I could be wrong on that.
No, probably somebody they picked up along the way. Yeah, yeah,
And then,
yeah.
but I don't know. I think one of the things that like separates Jesse James from like Billy the Kid or even Wild Bill is that he had that kind of a Robin Hood motif going. Like most of
Right.
the time that after he would rob a bank, he would find some widow or someone struggling and give them part of the loot. And whether that was just a way for folks to sell newspapers or dime novels, how much of it actually happened, I'm not sure. But just that I don't know, just that aspect to him like really solidifies that like archetypal anti-hero. You know what I mean? He's doing bad things, but he's doing it for a good cause.
Right, right. Yeah. It's funny that you should ask me that question earlier because I just threw Jesse James out there because he's one of those people I think of as a complete outlaw, much like Butch Cassidy.
Hmm.
The complete outlaw, had a lot of brains, thought a lot ahead of what they were doing. But there are lawmen out there um, that were just amazing people as well. Selman and Tillman, those people were amazing lawmen that nobody wanted to mess with. Scarborough, all those people were pretty. Everybody was afraid of them. So I mean, everybody meaning bad guys. Bad guys were afraid of these people. They didn't want to go up against them. Hickok was another one. I think Hickok in later years, he was sort of waning. I read that his relationship with Agnes Lake, the circus performer,
Hmm.
rendered him with syphilis and that he was starting to go blind. I don't know if that's true or not, but why did he make that decision in the number 10 saloon to face the back wall and not face the door as he always did? What was going through his mind? Was he going a little kooky at that point?
Yeah,
A lot of
yeah.
things go through my mind. I try to wonder about what was going through their mind at the time. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, and Wild Bill's an interesting one as well because, like, he already had that like established celebrity before he got into law enforcement. So, like, people already knew who he was. He already had notoriety across the West. But I mean, he's still one of the best shooters that you find back then.
yeah.
Um, and it was actually interesting to say. I couldn't afford this one, but they had that same document shop I was talking about. One of the original poster advertisements for the Wild Bill Wild West show.
Oh, yeah.
So at some point in time, it came through Springfield probably, and I forget exactly which location was on the advertisement, but just being able to like see him and Annie Oakley's lithographed caricature on there. Like, it really just kind of brings that sense of, well, like I said before, it just kind of gives you that hands-on kind of feel for the history.
Yeah. Another one who was speaking about a really good shot was John Wesley Hardin. And there are, I don't think he gave them out. I don't think he sold them, but I think people really, well, after he was released from prison and he was working as a lawyer, I guess that wasn't a really successful career for him. He would do demonstrations, and there's a couple of business cards, and I believe maybe it's not business cards, maybe it's playing cards that he shot from a distance
Really?
offhand. Um, and it's impressive because you think, wow, you read some stories about people who captured him, who wanted to see his how good he was with a firearm, and so they would give him an unloaded firearm and just sort of see what he could do. And he apparently was pretty amazing. He really practiced a lot, and he was really good with guns, much like Wild Bill Hickok. And the two of them actually had a square off at one point in Abilene, Texas, I believe.
Really?
Is it Abilene? I think it's Abilene. Yeah. Um, Hickok basically told him to put his guns away and take his guns off. And according to this is in his autobiography, but according to John Wesley Hardin, he pulled his guns out and did a Josie Wales on him, which is called the road agent spin. Flipped
Hmm.
the guns over and pointed him at Hickok, and Hickok backed off and said, "Okay, it's all good. We're fine here." you know, whether or not that really happened, it's pretty interesting to think that two known shootists who were basically so good with guns that they could pretty much hit anything they wanted to
Yeah.
would have a moment there. I think we all love that. That's part of your romance that you were talking about.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Wild Bill have a or a crossroads with crossroads cross paths with Brazelton as well?
I've not heard of that.
I could be making it up.
Brazelton, from my understanding, it didn't travel much further than New Mexico or Texas.
Okay.
So it's possible. It's possible, but I don't think that. Well, once again, I'd like to know more information about him to find out, but I didn't know that.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure if that's a factoid or not, but that's just something I've definitely heard before. Because I don't know, there's a lot of tall tales about Hickok, coming face to face with all different kinds of outlaws and gunmen, and it's hard to differentiate fact from fiction most of the times because I mean these characters, though they were real historical guys, I mean they've been mythologized to the point that they're larger than life now. I mean, they're
Right,
they're tall tales. They're beyond. They're legends at this point.
right. And even back then, to a certain extent,
Yeah.
because if you noticed, most of those people we're talking about were shot from ambush. They were shot in the back of the head. Jesse James, Bill Hickok, John
Hmm.
Wesley Hardin, because nobody wanted to face them. So if you were smart, you assassinated them when they weren't looking. Because why would you want to take the chance that you'd be just another person to make them famous and be dead? So I think people were smart. If they wanted to take them out and make a name for themselves, you did it from ambush. Of course, in the case of Ford, he he had to live his whole life as the killer of Jesse James, and I think it really kind of ruined him for the most part.
Yeah, you would imagine so, but I mean, I don't know, rightly earned at that point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think he was a very friendly guy anyway. but
Yeah, not at all. Well, we are getting to the end of the show, so I guess looking forward with the Arizona Ghostriders, what sort of videos they have in the pipe works for us?
well, a lot of people ask me if I would start doing profiles on some of the famous people back then, and I've really only touched on them, but that's
Mhm.
what I really want to do in the future. Is I've done a lot of overviews, which is the idea that I want to do is overviews so that I can get into the nitty gritty later on. But I want to talk about the Jesse James and the Billy the Kid and some of the famous people out there, like I did with Stagecoach Mary. I want to get into that
Yeah.
and and teach people who these guys and girls really were.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well because once you start to differentiate fact from fiction, you start to have a greater appreciation for the real life stories of these people. And I mean, just well, with your channel in general right now, I mean, if you folks go over to Arizona Ghostrides on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube, all you got to do is go to that search bar right at the top. It's right above the video link there. You can just type in Arizona Ghostrides and you will find dozens of videos about little things about life in the West, whether it's, ways of cooking, whether it's ways of cleaning. It's just all these little things that like you take for granted because, you don't even really like think about some of the specifics that you cover because it gives you a like what going back to it again, it gives you a better practical understanding of what life was actually like back then, and then you have a greater appreciation of the tall tales that come from it.
Every week, I challenge myself. A lot of people say, "Boy, you know a lot." You know what? I don't know a lot. I'll be honest with you. Um, I research a lot, and I try to find that one thing that I don't know that I don't think other people will know either. Every week I try to bring that
Yeah.
really odd thing that people go, "Oh, wow, I've been researching so long. I didn't know that." And that's the gem for me. That's the little nugget of fun that I really enjoy. And that's what I hope to bring in the future too. So
Yeah, every time I've done lecturing and stuff, given talks at places, the one thing that I love is when like you see someone's like face have that aha moment, like, oh, okay, and
right.
like
Yeah.
something just clicks for them, and it's that's like it comes full circle, and like they have they something just resonated that it made sense for them, and it put a lot of things into better perspective. And, as folks who are interested in history, the better we can portray those kind of aha moments and the better people have an understanding of history, the importance of the human tale, the importance of, human progression and how society has evolved over time, it'll give us a greater perspective on where we want to go in the future.
Well said.
Awesome. Well, Santee, I want to thank you for coming on the show. And folks, again, if you are watching this on YouTube, go ahead, give them a like, give them a subscribe, because we are going to see you on down the trail.
Hey, thanks.